Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical. Let me start with some macro thoughts. This is the US two-year note. The chart is from Simple Trends, and I said a few weeks ago when I read that article, The Wizard of Oz, that I would be a seller of this, and that trade is in the money. And the other point to note really is that it is the interest rate setting instrument for many parts of the world. Things move in many respects in correlation. Part of the attraction in the dollar right now is that when you compare it to other countries, you are getting a real rate of return. But the issue is whether the Federal Reserve has capitulated to Mr. Trump. 1st of July, I said, and if I were back at that desk, I would be limit short the euro-dollar, US interest rates market as for Monday. So you can go and have a look at the price on the previous chart from the 1st of July to today. I said then reality will soon intrude on this reality show. Look at this, export growth in Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong have basically collapsed. That's from David Inglis. And the bigger collapse is this. Singapore's electronic exports, often seen as a bellwether for global GDP growth, were down 31.9% year on year in June. That's from JS Blockland. And Singapore is clearly caught up in the crossfire of the US-China trade war. Bitcoin on the down, last trading at 9,300, fell below 10,000 yesterday. Let's keep an eye on that. Of course, it started its rally this year from around 4,000. Home thoughts, fiction is art, and art is the triumph over chaos. To celebrate a world that lies spread out around us like a bewildering and stupendous dream, John Cheever. Launch day, Apollo 50th, that tweet was from the US Ambassador to the United Kingdom, took me back to Gravity's Rainbow, a 1973 novel by Thomas Pynchon, which is about the design, production and dispatch of V-2 rockets by the German military. In particular, it features the quest undertaken by several characters to uncover the secret of a mysterious device named the Schwarze Gerät, the black device, slated to be installed in a rocket with the serial number 00000. Then quotes, of course, that quote I love about the parabola, a curve each of them feels unmistakable, it is the parabola. Political reflections, I'm going to stick with President Trump. The New Yorker says President Trump's hostility towards minorities and his capacity to signal that hostility to others has never been a secret. This quality is central to his politics and his appeal. Kit Brown, a driver who worked at one of Trump's casinos in Atlantic City, told Nick Pawngarten in the New Yorker when Donald and Ivana came to the casino, the bosses would order all the black people off the floor. I was a teenager, but I remember it. They put us all in the back. Like a self-infatuated child, Trump said of his own tweets, the more controversial ones, I used to watch it like a rocket ship when I put out a beauty. Over the weekend, Trump put out a beauty telling his 60 million Twitter followers that 4 members of Congress, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Rashida Tlaib, 4 Democrats on the left, 4 women of color, that they should go back to the countries from which they came if they were going to keep on criticizing him. So that's the context of this near-term furore. The Washington Post, Trump saw white nationalists seam in Republican politics and pulled at it to achieve power. He kept tugging and tugging and has dragged in his direction the entirety of the Republican Party. Now, 5th of December 2016, I said Trump is a linguistic warfare specialist. And I was referring to Little Marco and Lying Hillary. It's actually the linguistics of WWF wrestling, if you really want to dive into the linguistics of it. And it's very, very effective. And I said the linguistic warfare specialist, I said this yesterday, Trump has laid a trap. And Team AOC, Ilhan, and the others are exactly where he wants them. Rabbits caught in the headlights and not sufficiently politically, situationally aware. We all have a moral compass. It's not about the moral compass and putting it like a badge and coming on television and talking about it. It's more about the politics. And by putting them on the pedestal, he's diluted everybody else in the Democratic Party, and he's facing an opponent that he has chosen and against whom he's keeping whitewash the next re-election. Then I saw this tweet: "You are free to leave if you hate us, ladies." That's from the real Chapsky. And then Troll Colors said there is a reason Trump tweets gives him Pavlovian control over the narrative. Absolutely correct. So overall, I think if he pursues this strategy, he's going to win big time, and particularly if these four ladies play into his hands, which they're doing. Currency markets, let's take a look at that. Euro dollar 112.17, dollar index 97.31, Japanese yen 108.26, Swiss franc 0.9891, the pound, which has fallen sharply, 124.02, traded below 124. The Australian dollar 0.7008. I think that's going to tumble as well. India rupee 68.7745. South Korean won 1180.69. Weakness in electronics seeping into that currency. Brazilian real 376.85, Egyptian pound 16.62, and the South African rand softening now ahead of a possible rate cut as early as tomorrow, 13.98 when I checked last. The pound is down nearly 1.5% this week as investors have responded to the growing risk that Boris Johnson's Brexit strategy could lead Britain to a no-deal exit from the EU within months. This chart is from the Financial Times, and we're last at 124.03. Sterling is at more than 2-year lows, but the point to note is that the twin deficit, the trend has been improving due to fiscal tightening, that according to that analysis the pound is undervalued, but that's not the point here. Once the political risk overwhelms the fundamentals, the disconnect can become far wider, so it could get more undervalued in my opinion. Dollar index, this is a chart from Adam Mancini. We've come back, notwithstanding all this loose talk out of Trump, we've come back within 1% of the 2019 highs. I remain a bull on the dollar. I've given you my reasons before. Euro dollar, about which I'm a bear, 112.17. The low for the year was about 111.01. I'm an advocate of one-touch knock-in options at 106, 12-month maturity. I like this article, which was in the Wall Street Journal, and a quote from it. It's about Oscar de la Renta, the fashion house. The principal is now dead. And they're talking about luxury fashion's new frontier, China. It's water out of a fire hose, says Poland, in terms of the opportunity he sees there. Interesting article in Wired about, do you think that Paul LaRue is the Bitcoin creator Satoshi? A very in-depth article with Paul LaRue is a fascinating character. If you're interested, it's on Wired. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. Whoever Satoshi was, the personal persons was sitting on a fortune roughly 1 million bitcoins that analysts estimated Satoshi had mined at the currency's inception in 2009. At current prices, that stash will be worth more than $10 billion. Elon Musk explains his startup Neuralink. The brain tech features extremely tiny threads about the size of a neuron robotic system for inserting electrodes into brain-powerful sensors. His strategy he's mind-boggling, isn't he? It's very clever, actually, and you can take you down a wormhole. Now, look at this chart, which is correlating gold and negative yielding debt. And as you would expect, the correlation coefficient is close to 100%. And essentially, that's informing us that as interest rates go below zero, the price of holding gold becomes a free option. And that's what I wrote about in The Wizard of Oz world. That link is on Rich Wrap-Up's Gold. Where are we? 1403.50. Let's see how things develop from this point in time. I think everyone is very bullish, and I think we could see a deeper setback before we start moving higher, but we'll keep an eye on that. WTI, which crossed or touched 60 just a couple of days ago, had its biggest loss in 2 weeks as Trump's threat of new tariffs on Chinese imports rekindled fears about global demand. $58.12 last that I looked. And then, in quite a mysterious story, Iran's foreign ministry issued a statement confirming that the MT Ria had a technical problem in the Strait of Hormuz and was towed to Iran for repairs. The tanker never signaled for help, and at some point its transponder was simply turned off. In my article over the weekend, I'd said the populists are now in charge, central bankers are now doing the bidding of their leaders, and ergonomics might well be the precursor for where this all ends up. The Financial Times spoke about the dead of night sacking last week by legally dubious presidential decree of Murad Setinkaya, the governor of Turkey's central bank. Frontier markets, a Rhino bond breaks new ground in conservation finance, and the person who's thought about this Rhino bond, his mother was my English teacher at Kenton, not far down the road. Investors in we met up about a year ago, and he told me exactly what he was proposing to do, so this has not come as a surprise. Investors in the $50 million bond will be paid back their capital and a coupon if African black rhino populations in 5 sites across Kenya and South Africa increase over 5 years. The yield will vary depending on changes in the rhino population, which has sharply declined since the 1970s. There's $1 billion a day funding shortfall for conservation. Wow. And the traditional sources of conservation finance, philanthropists and donor agencies, are not going to be able to pick up the difference, said Giles Davis, Chief Executive of Conservation Capital. There are vast pools of capital looking for a home, and post-Blue Planet, there's great interest in sustainable conservation. So, great idea, very, very timely. This is a photograph of rhinos in the Meru National Park, and that day I tweeted, "Rhinos are incredible, noble creatures that take us back millions of years." And the story made the front page of the Financial Times International edition. Now, Sudan junta and civilians have signed a power-sharing deal. This is in the BBC. It is a historic moment for the country. The deputy head, who is also the signing authority of Sudan's ruling military council, Mohammed Hamdan Ahmeti Dagalo, was quoted as saying by the AFP. The military seized power in April after deposing Omar al-Bashir. The two sides agreed to rotate control of the Sovereign Council, the top tier of power, for just over 3 years. Well, I'm not sure the military has done this out of the goodness of their own heart. June, I was writing about this revolution, and I said the zeitgeist of the revolution in Khartoum was intoxicating. As I watched events unfold, it felt like Sudan was a portal into a whole new normal. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood. Capturing the zeitgeist of the now is not an easy thing because we're living in a dizzyingly fluid moment. Fantastic interview by David Pilling of the Financial Times with Bobby Wine, who's announced he's going to run for Ugandan president in 2021. We came to the conclusion that we should challenge this regime as a generation. The median age of Uganda's 43 million population is 16. The youngest still in the median age of 19 across Africa, the world's most youthful continent. Mr. Museveni, who came to power in 1986, is 74. According to Bobby Wine, Mr. Museveni gave an instruction that I should be eliminated. I know he will try to block me from running as he has not received any serious challenge in 34 years. The issue for Mr. Bobby Wine so far, as how I read it, is there is not much beef around his policy. But then maybe that's not necessary in today's world. Received strong international support after his arrest and subsequent beating last year, but campaigners for gay rights have accused him of homophobia. Lyrics in some of his songs contain what appear to be anti-gay views. Mr. Wine claims he has since renounced those views. He told the FT this year that he had been misled by religious doctrine in Uganda, which condemns homosexuality, but he had since modified his opinions. Growing up, I've become more respectful and more tolerant, he said. South Africa, this report out of the Institute of Finance, government debt to GDP is fast approaching 60%, sounding alarm bells over the country's ability to finance it. An increase in government debt has pushed South Africa to the largest change in emerging market debt to GDP year over year in all of sub-Saharan Africa, the IIF said. South African all shares up 10.08% year to date, and the market is very confident that South Africa will cut interest rates tomorrow. 18 out of 22 analysts surveyed by Bloomberg forecast a cut. One analyst by as much as 50 basis points. Dollar rand back to nudging around the 14 level. I wrote about Nigeria at the time of the election in February, and I said Baba Go Slow has got to be contrasted with President Al-Sisi's Egypt. I was not talking in any sense about the politics of Egypt or Nigeria. I was talking about the economics. And I said Al-Sisi made bold moves when it came to the economy. And probably it was easier to make bold moves because he had his, he was suppressing any dissent. So that's when you actually want to make these very painful moves. They devalued their currency early and are now reaping the dividend from that bolder economic policy. And now Bloomberg is reporting Egypt's economy is growing about twice as fast as Nigeria's. Egyptian pound 16.62, Egypt EGX 30 up 5.26% year to date. In that article of the Nigerian election, I said since President Buhari came to power in May 2015, Nigeria's stock market has fallen more than any other in the world, dropping 50% in dollar terms. There is a message in that performance. Now, according to Bloomberg, Nigeria's benchmark stock index fell for a fifth day, a slump that underscores foreign investor frustration over a lack of policy progress since Buhari won re-election in February. The index has declined 13% in the 5 months since Buhari, who is still to announce his cabinet, was declared the winner of the national vote. We are yet to see any major policy direction, and foreign investors are not comfortable with that. We don't have a new Minister of Finance. This is very critical to investors. The all share has dropped 10% this year compared with a 15% gain in an index of frontier markets. Recent central bank steps to push Nigerian banks to increase lending in a bid to boost the economy is weighing further on sentiment. An index of local banking stocks has dropped 23% from its 2019 high reached in February. The Nigerian all share is minus 10.28% this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange is minus 7.08% this year. More than half of Zimbabwe's people face hunger. Zimbabwe's government and donors will need to spend about $218 million to stave off hunger that could affect 5.5 million people, or 59% of the population. Drought and a poorly performing economy led to a rise in food insecurity. The Cabinet Secretary for the Interior, Mr. Matiangi, signed an order to deport 17 foreigners over gambling. The CS, during a betting control and licensing stakeholders meeting, said that almost 100% of the revenue raised by the gaming and betting firms owned by foreigners is repatriated to their home countries. This seems to be the issue. The Central Bank of Kenya has associated this capital flight to some distortions currently witnessed in the financial sector. The central bank on 15th of July wrote a letter to banks. The financial regulator expects Kenyan banks to keep a close watch on the accounts of the betting and lottery companies whose licenses have not been renewed. Matatu operators, according to David Ndeje tweet, have annual revenues in the range of $386 million to $420 million. The transport sector is a very attractive sector here in Africa. The US dollar has risen just 0.88% against the Kenya shilling since the beginning of the year, but you wouldn't know that when you read and listen to the commentary. Disruptive is a catchy word for fintech, but what are we disrupting? The financial industry was asleep, and there were just 3 million bank accounts for a 30 million adult population, said Professor Ndungu. Nairobi all shares up 6.2% year to date. The NSE 20 is down 5.78% year to date. Thank you for stopping by.